Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today is the final auction of February 2023 and you are looking at a brand new Tier 9 American heavy tank. This is the T54 Heavy. This vehicle has a 120mm main armament that has 450 alpha damage, which actually makes it the hardest hitting American heavy tank inside the game. It's pretty much the hull of like an M48 with a unique kind of turret and, ooh yes, a nasty little weak point on top of the vehicle. This thing is a hard-hitting tank with 12 degrees of gun depression that likes to just dominate a ridgeline and dictate the pace of the combat to its opponents. Today I'm going to be letting you know everything about this vehicle, firstly running down the statistics of this exciting Tier 9 premium tank, and then showing you whether it's good or not in the gameplay so you can decide whether it's worth spending your hard-earned gold on it in the auction today, or if you're watching this at a future date and this is a full tank review, whether it's worth buying at whatever price it will be in the future. So firstly, let's compare the T54 Heavy with the other three Tier 9 premium heavy tanks inside this game. Can you believe that even a couple of years after Tier 9 premium tanks first went into the game, we've already got 4 of them sitting in here now. And we can see that the T54 Heavy packs the highest damage per minute of any of these vehicles in this comparison. But it's not really that much higher than something like a Chieftain prototype, but it is substantially higher than WZ-114. Now, the T54 Heavy has a 120mm armament, worse than the 114, better than the Stridsvagn K, and slightly better than the Chieftain prototype, or only negligibly so. However, its alpha damage is 450, really trumps the Chieftain prototype and the Stridsvagn K, but definitely doesn't get close to the WZ-114. But when you consider this thing reloads in 13 seconds compared to 20 on the WZ-114, this thing does feel like a significant advantage. It's pretty crazy to think that this vehicle, for 50 extra alpha damage, which is very substantial, only has to reload for 1 extra second. And this 450 alpha really does help you to make better trades. However, this is where the good news kind of ends with regards to the firepower on this tank, and that is because it has 240mm of standard pen, which means that, yeah, you guessed it, you have to load a lot of gold. But this thing with 300mm of gold pen, it's good, but it's not nearly as good as the 310mm of APCR pen on the Chieftain for engaging at decent distances. But I guess it's better to have that heat if you want to go through those thinly armored targets. And the Stridsvagn K gets the same 310mm of pen, and the 114 gets 311mm of heat, so definitely kind of up on the DPM but down with regards to the rest of the firepower on the T54 Heavy. And this is a tank that you're going to have to fire quite a lot of gold in if you want to remain competitive. A passing mention should be made to the amount of ammo that this tank carries, which is neither great nor awful. A little bit less than the Stridsvagn K and the 114, but considering its alpha damage is better, it's okay within that regard. But you will start to possibly run low on ammunition towards the latter part of the battle, but you'll have to be continuously firing for like 5 minutes to be able to achieve that. Gun handling wise, it's up and down with regards to this tank. The accuracy is horrible, meaning that you probably want to use an aiming device on this vehicle if you must have good gun handling. However, the gun dispersion when you're moving the turret is actually really good. 0.1. Definitely not a vert stabs kind of contender there, at least in my opinion. Movement dispersion, however, not nearly so good. But this thing makes the 114 look but just like an absolute joke with regards to its gun handling. And this does free up a slot. And I would thoroughly recommend on this tank that you consider improving the accuracy rather than improving the dispersion values on this vehicle with something like vert stabs. Now, this is the real ticket on this tank. It has an awesome gun depression of 12 degrees. And this is 12 degrees of all-round gun depression, well, over most of the hull. It does have a little bit of an issue over the back, where its gun depression gets halved to 6 over this big old American booty. But 12 degrees is just so flexible for this tank. It really helps you hide that weak point, as we're going to highlight later on. Mobility-wise, this vehicle is definitely not fast. It's fast backwards, though. 15 reverse speed is great. It's a little bit worse than the Stridsvagn K, but it definitely feels better backwards than the Chieftain prototype and massively better than the WZ-114, which feels like a slug in comparison. Power to weight rise, this vehicle has worse performance than the Chieftain prototype and the Stridsvagn K. It does have slightly worse ground resistances than the Chieftain prototype as well, which makes this thing feel substantially more sluggish than the Chieftain proto. But considering the Stridsvagn K has much worse ground resistances, while the Stridsvagn K will still be faster, it doesn't feel that much quicker. And this tank will feel much faster than the WZ-111 well, sorry, not the 111, the WZ-114, which it's not got the power to weight ratio to really back it up and doesn't have the top speed. So all in all, so far for the T54 Heavy, very run-of-the-mill kind of average stuff, better in some areas, worse in others. So let's talk about the armor. And the hull armor on this thing looks great. 254 at the front, 254 on the turret. Sign me up, this thing looks absolutely amazing. Well, that's until you see how it performs against 240mm of pen. The lower plate is tragic. The upper hull, not nearly as good as something like the T110E5, for example. When people load heat, yeah, your upper hull becomes really bad on this tank. And the side of this tank, it's really hit and miss. The lower part here is only 38.1mm thick, which means it can get overmatched by 120mm caliber guns. And when you kind of over-angle this American boat-shaped hull, which is very nice, then the side of the vehicle here becomes a little bit of an issue. And you can see that there is also an issue on the side of the turret when this thing wants to side scrape out as well that you're going to have to be careful with. But let's be honest, the main weak point that you can all see is this horrible weak point on top. It's 190mm of effective armor, which means that apart from tier 7 tanks, everyone's going to be going through this weak point. However, this tank does have an ace up its sleeve, and that is its 12 degrees of gun depression. When you do this, the weak point is much, much smaller. And now the pretty darn chunky turret on this vehicle starts to do very well indeed. So you really want to try and get on a ridgeline with a vehicle like this, and it will do exceptionally well, even allowing you to expose your upper hull to your opponents, unless they have really good heat pen. But even if they do, they're still not guaranteed to be able to get through you. So the T54 seems to be a real performer with regards to the armor. However, it only has 1,700 hit points. It's really not a lot for a vehicle like this. And a premium tank like the K2 that we saw the other day nearly has as much durability with regards to HP as a T54 Heavy. And this really lets the tank down, because it's not a tank that I personally want to use a durability device on because of that. And that kind of compounds the weakness of the vehicle. And because you've got that big old weak point, yeah, the hit points don't seem to go a real long margin with this tank. Also, let's add to the problem with this vehicle, some of the worst camo rating on any heavy tank. It makes the WZ-114 look sneaky because of that huge weak point, so you aren't hiding this tank anywhere. However, it does have 400 meters view range, which is lovely, and that will allow you to spot even without coated optics on a tank like this without a premium consumable if you have a good crew. You have got a good American heavy tank crew by now, right? Crew layout wise, the T54 Heavy works perfectly with the 3 top tier American heavy tanks, the M5Y, the T110E5, and the T57 Heavy all have the commander as the radio operator. So get yourself a good commander with recon, situational awareness, obviously get brothers in arms across the tank, and then take things like repairs so you can get your tracks back on, and this thing will start doing very well. Equipment wise, my preferred build on this vehicle will still be to take a durability device with vents and a gun rammer, because as I mentioned, the damage per minute on this vehicle is not bad, and so I want to do everything that I can to be able to maximize that. My second build on this vehicle will be dropping the durability device and taking vent, turbo, with a gun rammer to try and both maximize the mobility and the firepower of this tank. And remember, this tank is not fast. Even with a turbo, it can only go 39 forwards. And with the maps feeling like they're getting faster and faster and faster, you really want to keep up with the meta. So those would be my 2 recommended builds. Field mod wise on this vehicle, it's really simple. Take all-terrain suspension to improve your mobility. Take accuracy to be able to improve the horrible accuracy of the tank. Take a periscope device. Artillery aren't really a part of the game anymore, and you want all the view range you can get. And then for me personally, with the final field mod, I don't really care about the turret traverse on this vehicle, but improving that reverse speed gives you really nice reverse speed, 17 kilometers an hour without a turbo. And considering that this is a tank with its 12 degrees of gun depression that really wants to work a ridgeline, that's a bit of a lifesaver on a tank like this. That's all you really need to know about the T54 with regards to setting it up. Why don't I show you some gameplay? So again, as with all of my tank reviews going forwards, I'm going to be using regular equipment here. And you'll see at the very last second, I dropped out the durability device to be able to get a turbo because I want to get some mobility to race into position. And again, as I said, this vehicle doesn't have an impressive power to weight ratio. It's not bad for a heavy 14.46, but it's really that top speed limit of 34 kilometers an hour that really feels like the limiting factor. So, the T54 Heavy, what kind of positions do you want to take this tank into? Well, firstly, is there a ridgeline you can use? Are you playing on, for example, Muravanka? You go into the woods. Or I guess you can still go to the west of Muravanka now and you can go and start to work the ridges. Hopefully you're playing on a map like Live Oaks or Westfield. If you are, perfect opportunities with ridge lines there for you to be able to use. However, on a map like Erlenberg, not really too much opportunity. Man, the bloom on this tank is big, and wow, the 50 TP just managed to go right through the front of my vehicle. Also tracking me there, shooting me on the mood. I was, yeah, definitely shot my mood, but shooting me on the move there, and it definitely ruined my mood with losing 610 hit points with a high roll from the 50 TP at the start of the battle. Got to be a little bit sneaky here. The Teenage VZ51 misses me. I'm going to just look for a shot here on the 50 TP. You can see that the gun handling and the accuracy and the aim time, they're definitely not great. Some people will definitely want to use vertical stabilizers on this tank, but I personally, as I said, if I had to pick one, I would just take the aiming device on this vehicle, so you've got better sniping capacity. Your gun handling will be worse, but eventually your gun might actually get accurate, and this vehicle just doesn't have accuracy. It's pretty crazy Wargaming putting on all these vehicles that they've got the DPM, they just don't really have the accuracy. Think about the Iron Arnie, for example. That's why I slap a aiming device on my Iron Arnie. And if accuracy really matters to you as a player, I would recommend to possibly take the firepower slot and take an aiming device on this vehicle if you don't have a bounty one available. So you're noticing that this tank, it's just a rather large, fat American heavy that's quite hard to hide on a ridgeline. But boy, does this 450 alpha damage with this kind of rate of fire feel really good. And you're going to be seeing through the replay today, this tank just makes good trades. I'm a little bit concerned in this situation. I got hit in the side by the 416. But what's worse than not playing? Not really too much, and I think that I have to get in and try and help the fight against this Tiger 2 here. Right up behind them, and there's the 416 nailing me again in the side. I've got to try and stop this Tiger 2 from pushing me out against the 416, but I think I heard the Teenage VZ51 fire, so I'm just going to come around the corner and boom, finish him off, picking up our second kill of the game with 2,500 damage. It's not bad. And I have to admit, having a heavy tank which has a higher DPM feels pretty good. But so far, I mean, it's not really painting a very good picture of this vehicle, right? Our armor doesn't seem to be reliable, our gun seems to bloom out quite a lot, and while 450 alpha damage is nice, it's not like it's special, like something on an E75 which has 530, or a 111-14 which has 490. There are so many tier 9 heavy tanks that are hitting harder than this vehicle, and even the 50 TP on the enemy team, as we saw there, they've got 560 alpha. 450, it's a nice thing, but look at that gun depression. Spoilers, there isn't going to be much opportunity to use the gun depression in this replay, but don't worry, I've got a game coming up where you'll get to see what you can do with the 12 degrees of gun depression that this funky tank has. Man, having sound detection on the press account does feel really weird. And having that 450 alpha, yeah, it feels nice. If I'm in a T110 E5 in that scenario, I'll probably load an HE shell and be able to dump on them. But this vehicle doesn't have to do that. You don't have to faff with the HE rounds, you can just go straight with the AP. And this vehicle with its HE with 60mm of pen and 530 alpha damage could actually be rather deadly against, you know, your lightly armored tanks like your Borsigs and whatnot. And this thing, it seems to reload quick, right? I'm quite impressed with the damage per minute. Look, it's not like an M103 that really feels like it has a gun that truly blazes through the opponents, but it isn't bad for this kind of midpoint of alpha damage and damage per minute. It's not like the WZ-114 with its 530 alpha damage. It does deliver the shells when you're fully aimed very consistently with great penetration. And that 530 alpha damage feels special, but anyone who's played that tank will know that you're then having pretty much a 15 to 17 second reload depending on what kind of equipment you choose on that tank. And that, ladies and gents, boys and girls, is painful. Okay, so we're down to 169 hit points. We've managed to take out 5 of the enemy team. Feeling pretty chipper about this game. Just wanting to get forwards, and maybe we're going to get an opportunity to finally use the gun depression of this tank. No, pesky LTTB at decent distance. I wanted to try and push the tempo, wanted to try and get more from this game, wanted to be a little bit greedy because my team was capping out, but it wasn't to be. But anyway, you've seen what this vehicle can do in kind of like these trading situations. Why don't I show you what it does in a ridgeline scenario? Okay, so now we're loading in on steps and we've made our way forwards to try and get into a hull down position. And take a look at this, ladies and gents. This is 12 degrees of gun depression, just a straight up 12 degrees of gun depression on a ridgeline. It feels awesome. It's like I'm playing a Kranvang, but I'm not an autoloader. It's very unusual. Something like an STB-1 or a UDES can be able to achieve this, but they achieve that at tier 10 with hydropneumatic suspensions. This vehicle is like playing a Comet. It doesn't have a hydropneumatic suspension, it just gets a flat out 12 degrees of gun depression. And when you do that, your weak point doesn't feel nearly so big, and you have some very decent turret armor on this tank. And with its high damage per minute and relatively good alpha damage, yeah, it's pretty darn fun to play on a ridge. I guess the real problem is that when you don't have a ridge line, how exactly do you hide that horrible cupola on the vehicle? And I can tell you, even though this is a new tank and people are seeing it for the first time, it's pretty obvious, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out if a vehicle has a big machine gun on top of it and it looks American, that it is going to be one of the easiest ways to deal with the vehicle. What I want to highlight, however, here is that, yeah, man, the accuracy on this vehicle, the aim time and the gun handling combo really doesn't feel too special. In retrospect, I'm thinking about having my second build where I just drop the durability device on this vehicle because it's not really a side scraper, and instead I think I might go for vertical stabilizers on this tank. I've not really had enough time with this vehicle, as you can imagine, considering the auction only just came out today, to really be able to test out a wide variety. Definitely come and swing by the stream. I'm going to be grinding this vehicle to today when I start streaming on this Sunday, as well as also having what will be a mystery tech tree showcase, because I'm recording this in advance before I actually end up doing the voting. But yeah, I'll probably end up thinking about taking vert stabs, or actually, you know what, with missing these fully aimed shells, yeah, I'm not going to take vert stabs, I'm going to take an aiming device. I'll have a play around. I might try a bounty aiming device on this vehicle, because I use a bounty aiming device on an Iron Arnie, and it actually ends up working out very well. I think I just caught a shell with my gun there, possibly. Either that or the FE maybe just missed. It looked like it was a direct hit. And oh, baby. When this thing gets going and its shells actually hit, yeah, it feels pretty good. And eventually, our shells start to work after a couple of minutes of failures, and we pick up a kill on the Iron Arnie. And what I want to show in this replay is, firstly, yo, this gun, it's troll. Secondly, this turret, when you've got 12 degrees of gun depression, it's nice. And thirdly, just how comfortable and convenient this tank feels on a ridgeline. It will really surprise its opponents. And because that weak point is so small when you are using a large amount of your gun depression, I kind of found that a lot of people would end up just aiming at this thing more than they really would probably want to, trying to find that weak point. And quite often, with the 300mm of heat pen that this tank has, or even the 240 of AP being enough, you don't really need all the time to be able to make those shots at your opponents. It just feels really good hull down. And it's going to be a real pleasure to be able to have this kind of hull down gameplay while also playing a tier 9 premium tank. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like this is now the tier 9 premium tank. If I was in a chieftain, sure, I'd have 2 degrees of gun depression less, but I wouldn't have the horrible weak point on top of the vehicle. I'd have way better accuracy, I'd have comparable gun handling, and I'd probably just take vert stabs on that tank because it's got really good accuracy. And so a chieftain with vertical stabilizers will feel better than arguably a T54 Heavy that's using an aiming device. Probably. Because I think the chieftain prototype will leapfrog the T54 Heavy with that improved 20% or more dispersion when you're moving, whereas the T54 Heavy can only really reduce its accuracy by, like, I think 7%, and that's if you're using a bounty device. Slapping the weak point there of the AE Phase 1 with a regular round. Very lucky I hit that, but great job by the T30. Once again, putting in a big shell and finishing him off. I shot the Alpine Tiger there, who was hiding in the bushes behind me. And at this stage of the game, I thought, oh boy, another chance to just mop up, like on Erlenberg. Let's get in and let's get some kills against my opponents. But oh dear, no, I lost 408 hit points there to the Alpine Tiger, and I make a really bad misplay. I was honestly greedy. I was up by 3 kills, up by several thousand hit points, and I thought that I could just get in and work the ridge and take this fight down. And a good shot by the Alpine Tiger, and a gold round from the WTF Panzer IV, and suddenly things start to look a little bit ugly. And I'm realizing, oh dear, what have I done for my team? I've left it in the hands of the judges, and the WTF Panzer IV and the Alpine Tiger push out. The 50 TP ends up getting himself into a precarious situation. Our chieftain prototype thinks he's like some kind of hero, and he gets killed by an ELC even 90. And yeah, ladies and gents, I goofed. I screwed this game. I went in, I got caught by the WT, and I got, I guess, just too excited by the flexibility of this vehicle on the ridgeline. And I realized that this thing is actually a lot more vulnerable than you think when you're not on a ridge. Remember Erlenberg, we lost all of our hit points when we're not on our ridge. On this map, we were hemorrhaging hit points when we were not on a ridge, but we blocked 3,000 when we were. And I want to show you a very uneventful game on Himmelsdorf that I think will really give you an idea of how this thing behaves when it isn't on a ridge. So now we're rolling out on Himmelsdorf, and this time I am using the durability device instead of a turbo. And boy, it's taken a while to be able to get into position. Man, why do tanks just feel so sluggish unless they can go at 40 in World of Tanks these days? And I'm against a T832. They managed to fire at my hull armor there. Luckily they miss and they managed to hit the tracks instead. And I'm going to push forwards because I feel like, oh, really nice matchup. I'm a tier 9 heavy, right? And unfortunately, even though this is the first time these players will have ever seen a T54 Heavy, it doesn't take a genius to realize where the weak point is. And they are turning my weak point into Swiss cheese. And while I do have good damage per minute, and I'm easily able to outtrade the T832, well, at least if I don't shoot the gun like a complete turkey in that situation, I am losing hit points very rapidly. I tell this E75 I'm going to help them. I don't really want to block my Skoda friend here, but I have to get around the corner. I have to take the fight to the enemy team. I have to try and get shots. And unfortunately, the Skoda didn't do the wrong thing there by blocking me. It wasn't really his fault. And I want to try and get back and try and get safe in this scenario. We hit the T832. And look, I haven't played my best in this game. I think it was because I was just so darn frustrated and frankly tilted by the way that that weak point works. And while I do get my revenge on the T832, I just think that this is going to become a reality for this vehicle. Everybody is going to know about your weak point, and unless you're using your gun depression, this thing kind of feels like a renegade. But ladies and gents, it has worse damage per minute, unless you Amarak a Type 4 Heavy. It has worse damage per minute, substantially worse damage per minute than a renegade, and it is a higher tier. This thing kind of feels as if it's just a renegade at tier 9 that really just doesn't have all of the other statistics available. I wonder why I was firing an HE shell there. Was that just to be able to do some kind of damage to the Viper around the corner? Well, unfortunately, it ends up with me not doing a lot. And the 1390 is going to, you guessed it, hit my weak point over a ridgeline. Oh, look, I had some very good games in this tank. I had some games which I threw as well in this vehicle. And all in all, I can tell you that this ended up being quite a frustrating tank for me. It's nice on a ridgeline, but just having that weak point on top with really not super competitive damage per minute just feels as if you're always losing your trades. And while maybe the T54 Heavy holds up in comparison to vehicles like the Chieftain, prototype, the Stridsvagn K, and the WZ-114, as soon as we start to add vehicles into the mix, like the Tech Tree tanks, even like an M103 that nobody really thinks is that special, look how it compares. Way worse damage per minute, way worse penetration, especially on the premium rounds, 40mm less penetration there, worse aim time, massively worse accuracy, horrible gun handling compared to the M103. Sure, it has 4 extra degrees of gun depression. It actually ends up being slower than the M103 with regards to its mobility. Its armor is very comparable. I'd say the M103 actually has better armor because its weak point is smaller, and the M103 has 250 extra hit points, although 10 meters less view range, but way better camo than the T54 Heavy. And when we compare like the T54 Heavy to something like a Renegade, for example, I mean, the Renegade has better damage per minute at tier 8. It has way better gun handling, as if it was using vertical stabilizers. It's almost as if it's using an aiming device compared to the T54 Heavy. It's only got 2 degrees gun depression less, and I'd say the Renegade has comparable, if not almost better armor, at least tier for tier, than the T54 Heavy. And it's only got 200 meters less for the same amount of view range and way better camo. Honestly, the T54 Heavy, it doesn't really look like it's a tier 9 heavy tank within that regard. And I think that not enough people are really going to think about the weak point on top of this tank when they compare it to things like a Chieftain or a Stridsvagn K. However, the real winner is that 12 degrees of gun depression, and that will allow you to use ridge lines and to hide that weak point way better than other vehicles will be able to. So all in all, the T54 Heavy, do I think it's going to be the new best tier 9 premium tank in the game? No, it's really not. This is not going to be an overpowered vehicle. It has lackluster penetration on both of its rounds. Its damage per minute, its alpha damage isn't going to win any awards. Its gun handling and mobility definitely isn't. I'd say its durability isn't going to win any awards either. But its 12 degrees of gun depression definitely will allow this tank in a knowledgeable player's hands to get into positions that will surprise its opponents. And if you can work the ridgeline, 450 alpha damage still feels special, and it will allow this thing to have moments of magic. Now, for everyone who's watching this video on release day and talking about the auction, I don't know what the base cost of gold for this vehicle will be. I expect the base cost will be at least 12,000 gold. I very much doubt that with 20,000 units being available on EU and 7,000 units being available on NA that this thing will go for min bid. But I can't imagine it really going for more than like 15,000 gold. It's definitely not worth 20, at least in my opinion. If you've already got yourself a Chieftain prototype, I don't really see this thing being as special. If you've got yourself a Stridsvagn K, I don't think the T54 Heavy is that much better. And if you've got yourself a wealth of tier 8 premium tanks, unless you really want to have a tier 9 because you hate tier 8 matchmaking and you want to be able to get extra bonds when you play your premium tanks at tier 9, then the T54 Heavy isn't going to end up being that special. But it's still a novel tank, it's a balanced tank, and I like the Wargaming at implementing novel balanced tanks. So thumbs up to you Wargaming for that. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for the T54 Heavy. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. And if you thought this video was fun or useful, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And as I said, tune in later today for a mystery tech tree showcase, as well as gameplay of all of the previous vehicles that have been available inside the auction. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.